Hello and welcome to Megan's Social Media Marketing Show. I am so excited to have with me Kate Boyd. She is going to talk to us about being an Enneagram 5 in this series called Know Your Customer Through the Enneagram. Our goal is to get you as marketers to understand a little more about how to welcome the Enneagram 5 on social media. So thank you so much for being with us, Kate.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I love talking about being a 5 because I don't hear it very often.
Yeah. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, anything that you'd like us to know.
Yeah. Well, I do a lot of things. By day, I am a communications person in one department of a university up here in Dallas. And then, I'm also a seminary student, and I do some writing and speaking about discipleship in community.
And you can be found on Instagram where?
At kateboyd.co.
.co. Anywhere else? I know you're on Twitter as well. Are you the same there?
No, because you can't put dots in your name. Otherwise, I would. There, it's obnoxious. It's the Kate Boyd.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it's the obnoxious Kate Boyd or something like that.
I always get very self-conscious that it's like the Kate Boyd, but it was like one of the only iterations of my name that wasn't confusing. And so I'm like, I'm the Kate Boyd, you guys. So it's very weird, but that's what it is.
Verified. That's so funny. Okay, before we dive into all things social media and your experience, I would love to read to you a short description of Enneagram 5, and you can tell me if you relate well or if there's something in particular that you relate most with about this description. So 5s are alert, insightful, and curious. They are able to concentrate and focus on developing complex ideas and skills. Independent, innovative, and inventive, they can also become preoccupied with their thoughts and imaginary constructs. They become detached, yet high-strung and intense. They typically have problems with eccentricity, nihilism, and isolation. At their best, visionary pioneers, often ahead of their time, are able to see the world in an entirely new way. That description was from the EnneagramInstitute.com, which is a great resource. I recommend it for everyone. So, Kate, what resonated with you about that description?
All of it. I mean, I'm a thinker, I'm an observer. I sit back and I do sometimes get lost in my own thoughts, or instead of actually putting things together and, like writing them out and getting them out of my head, I sometimes just stay with them. But I do like just pondering things and looking at stuff and putting together threads that other people haven't seen yet or that I've noticed for the first time. And so, yeah, it's really fun then to apply that to something that actually needs to be fixed or needs attention, because then you can just sort of like sit back and observe and then jump in once the dots connect for you. And so that's at least how my brain works. And I feel like the other 5s I know have similar ideas.
Great. So what does a typical week or day look like for you on social media? What are the apps that you spend time on? Where do you like to hang out? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, well, it certainly includes much more social media than it probably should every day, which is probably a common story. I mean, I wake up and I check things because, I use social media for personal, but also professional things. And so I regrettably check it first thing in the morning, which I'm trying to fix, but there we are. And then, usually when I get to work, whenever I'm enjoying my coffee, I kind of, scroll a little bit. I usually hang out mostly on Twitter and Instagram, Twitter being probably my favorite or primary place. Instagram, I like stories and connecting with people sometimes, but I don't know, it feels a little bit harder to navigate in a way. And then I pop on throughout the day if there's like minutes in between. And so, as a creator, I plan more for Instagram, and Twitter is more spur of the moment, or something's sort of like out in the ether that sparks something and then you can jot it down. And so Twitter becomes a great place to even like test ideas that then can be more curated for like an Instagram environment and stuff like that. So I like, yeah. And I like the conversations that I have on Twitter, because you tend to start seeing some of the same communities and people and throwing around ideas. And I've also found that once you build a community, they're much more trusting and less like jump all over you than than Instagram can be about certain things. So yeah, it's sort of like just like everyone else, you know, I have my phone with me all the time, so I'm up and I'm on it more than I should be.
Well, we can all say that.
Yes.
So it's interesting to hear you say that you feel like Twitter is a space where you can have more conversations that people on Instagram will be like, oh, or they jump on you for, I think were the words that you used, which many people would describe the opposite way.
I think it depends on the communities you find there. So I think Instagram is, because I don't use hashtags and stuff on Twitter, and I don't really see people using them for normal conversation, like unless you're seeking out specific controversial content that sometimes shouldn't be controversial, but it is, you know, or it gets sort of like retweeted into your community, you're probably not even aware of it. So you sort of end up more in a corner. I think Instagram, you know, there is a level of sharing that happens there that's a little more public. And then if you're trying to be found and trying to build platforms and things like that, you're using hashtags and you're connecting with people. And the circles that I'm in, there tend to be very strong opinions on some very specific things. And so if you talk about those things, it can be both good and bad. But I've certainly found, at least in my experience, and maybe I'm probably just not popular enough on Twitter to incur the wrath of a lot of people just yet. But I have found Instagrammers to be much more touchy about things.
That's true. I can see how that perception could happen because Twitter is a more opinionated place by nature. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. It seems opposite at first, but I get what you're saying in that like Instagrammers are a little more, it's less of a, let's throw out all of our opinions. And it depends on what circles you're in, of course, as you said. But so in the different communities that you've curated in both places, they have different ways of reacting.
They're just very different, like you said, communities. And so it's always interesting to see what translates to which thing to me.
Okay. So as you, for entertainment purposes, think like this is just you using your social media. What are some things that just drive you crazy? Do you have pet peeves when you're on any platforms?
Well, I think the first thing, as a creative person, I have a pet peeve with people not attributing quotes and things like that. That really bugs me. Or I also try really hard. Like I know that the power is in a sound bite, but I also try really hard to be nuanced, even when I do work for sound bite potential. And so people just sort of like throwing things out, even though they don't even fully agree with those things, or they would admit to various nuances. Like all the platforms at this point have a way for you to put nuance into things, whether it's in the original tweet or in the thread below or in the graphic on Instagram or in the caption. Like there's a lot of ways to do that. And then of course, when I'm interacting with people or people are interacting on my stuff, when they don't actually read all of the things that you put there and you have to like explain yourself over and over, but in a way that's like not rude, because I'm a woman who talks about theology. And so I'm already sort of like on the edge in some ways. And so being like, it's almost like that, you know, per my last email, like per the caption above, just like normal grammar things. Like I get really like, I hate when I have a typo and something's already taken off and I'm like, well, I can't change it now. And it's just out there and everyone knows. So yeah, I mean, I think it's things like that, or just like when people don't ask questions for clarification and just there's like a pile on without any understanding or generosity, full of assumptions. And so I know
Mm.
that, so whether that's something that you put out there or something that people are responding to that you put out there, that's rough.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What are some things on social, or maybe a place on social, that you could just go down the rabbit hole? Like you get lost.
I actually spend a lot of time on TikTok too, just like scrolling, because there's everything from like adorable dog videos to like funny people to people sharing random things. And so there'll be some rabbit holes that you find one video that someone stitched or duetted or whatever, and you just like follow all of that, which is interesting. And then I also just I love really really deep, intense like Twitter threads where people are just like, it's almost like a blog post, but it's on Twitter about about something that's important. And so I like just sort of like digging into that and then looking more at that person and going down and seeing all the other responses and resources that people put in there. And so, yeah, those kinds of things. So anything that it can be totally useless and silly, like your favorite celebrity interview. Like I love those clips, but I also love the ones where somebody's really presenting a detailed, different point of view or subset of knowledge that's helpful for something happening in the culture.
Mm. You touched on it a little bit. I was wondering, because the stereotype of an Enneagram 5 is that you have to research everything and you have to be 100% informed, and you can go down these huge rabbit holes without coming up for air. Is that something that you do on social media, or is it something that you're researching elsewhere? Social media might send you there, or is that not even something that you have a tendency toward?
Oh, I definitely have a tendency toward it. Probably every week there's something else that I'm like, ooh, and usually it starts on social media. I would say mostly on Twitter. Somebody posts an article or they do a thread or something, and it sends me, Googling stuff and watching videos and tracking down all the stories and the history of it and really figuring it out. Because I also have like my undergrad was journalism. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding things and I'm seeing both sides of stuff, and the facts are correct on different sides. And so so to me, it's sort of a weird way to do like reporting and research when you can just sort of like track stuff down. And social media usually is the starting place for stuff like that for me. I mean, I know I have a long list, and at this point, my life is very busy and full of things that have to be done. Like I'm sitting in front of a bunch of reading that I have to be doing for school. And so I actually have a long list of things that over summer I want to do more research on.
You have a research list, like
I do. That's my fun summer plans, or my theological research that I don't have to do for school.
Love it.
So if that tells you anything about being an Enneagram 5. Yeah. And so it definitely starts there, or gets me thinking, or I talk with people about those things there, or ask for resources about different stuff, and then just kind of like make a backlog or constantly ordering books so that I can eventually dig into those things if I don't have the bandwidth to do it at the moment.
Okay. So let's do a little round robin of the different social platforms, and you can tell me yay, nay, I hate this, I love this is how I use it, what you might spend time or like it for, or what you don't like. So Facebook, we have not touched on.
Facebook has, at least from a personal side, I understand, as a person who's familiar with marketing, the marketing benefits of being on Facebook. And I technically have a page there. I also have a personal profile, but I don't really use it except to interact with groups in various programs or special things. Yeah, because Facebook is a wild animal these days, personally. And so it's easier to not see things than to see things and be frustrated by them all the time. So I sort of stay away. But that's probably symptomatic of where I am in our cultural moment right now.
That makes sense. That's another place where people I think feel like lots of opinions.
Lots of opinions and lots of, I mean, I could spend my whole day there fact checking people and it's exhausting. So I don't, and then that turns into arguments and these are people that you know. And so it becomes a little bit more challenging to navigate with grace and kindness and still be able to maintain relationships sometimes. So, and it took up a lot of brain space. Where are we in April, 4, 5, 6 months ago? And so it's just sort of like, we're just not going to be there for a while, probably.
You bring up an interesting point, or at least you're reminding me of one, that Enneagram Fives typically have the least amount of energy stores per day than all the other personality types. Do you experience that personally? And does that, like you described with Facebook, help you or make you have to set boundaries?
I definitely have to set boundaries. And I think the energy depends on the type of interaction more than the interaction itself specifically, because things that exert a lot of emotional energy or even mental energy to a degree, because that's how I want, like my intellectual energy, I want to use in a different capacity. And so there are things that I'd set boundaries around so that I deal less with that when possible. Yeah. So that's how that goes.
Okay. Twitter is next.
I really enjoy Twitter for a few reasons. I think there's a level of access to people there that you wouldn't always get to have conversations with, or that you read their books. And if you're, at least in my sort of like Christian nonfiction arena, even as a consumer, I've actually gotten to have conversations on Twitter with people whose books that I really loved or things like that. And so there's sort of like a level of dialogue that happens there that doesn't happen on other platforms. I feel like people share a lot of interesting knowledge, and there's sort of like little niche communities you can end up in, whether that's around certain interests or certain beliefs or certain experiences. There are sort of ways to get yourself in, and then you end up, with this great community of people. And it's also like people are very comfortable there with big questions. Like I don't feel like as a contributor, like a creator, I feel like I can actually just show up there and like wrestle with stuff or like ask a question and get people's thoughts. Whereas I feel like on Instagram or something, I have to be more of a contributor. Like I have to show up and be more experty from from a creative perspective. And so Twitter has at least become this place where we can talk about, even though you're very limited in how you can do that, from a character perspective, at least the people that have sort of come around or have been around for a little bit. I had a big group of followers just come on recently. And so they're sort of figuring, because it was totally unrelated. And so they're sort of figuring out what I'm all about. But the people around, like, even if I ask hard questions or I don't feel like I have to like put a disclaimer around like, I know that Twitter is limited and please understand these are earnest questions. They're like, no, we know you and we know that you only ask like this. And so it's a very, I don't know, it feels like a very different place. So I really enjoy Twitter for the interaction and for the way that I can both put out stuff that says like, hey, I know what I'm talking about, but also just create conversations about things that I'm finding interesting right now or that I'm thinking about and processing over time, and have other people share how they're processing it too.
Great. Instagram
is fun most of the time. I like that they are always playing with new features to sort of experiment with, or even just sort of like allow me to be creative or to see other people being creative. I would say I don't look at feeds very much. I'm more of like, I really like stories if it's not like going on forever. That's most of what I do on Instagram from a consumer standpoint, is watch people's stories. And then there's like a handful of people that I always look for or get notifications for, so that I can make sure that I'm keeping up with my friends while keeping up with my sort of, creatory part. But so from that perspective, it's really good and interesting. And I like to see what people share with other people, which is why stories is really interesting too, because you can see what other people are relating to, or that's how I sort of find new accounts to follow, is like what my friends are following and what they're sharing. And it's really it's become a little less about it all being pretty, which I kind of enjoy. I think that's part of it still, but I like that it's a little bit more raw and aesthetic anyway than it used to be, and that you can just you can spitball things, or you can write longer, more thoughtful things, or just be silly and create community there too. So I like it. Again, my particular circles, there are pockets of it that are very eager to jump on you for specific things. But overall, I enjoy sort of like the peek into people's lives that I get there.
That is interesting, because I don't know if I've had somebody say they spend most of their time in stories. So that is interesting to hear. And Kate does amazing reels. Go follow her for her reel. If anything else, follow her for the reels. They're very entertaining. Let's move on to Pinterest.
I technically have an account, but I don't really use it. Or if I'll use it when I'm looking for something specific from a perspective. Like when I got a new job a couple of years ago, I needed some new clothes because I had gotten rid of a lot of my, office clothes, because I was working on my own for a while. And so I was like, well, I've got to figure out how a regular person dresses when they go to the office. Or, we built a bar in our house. And so I went to Pinterest to look for things. So that's really sort of like a very specific search engine for me. And I don't really use it for promotional things. From a promotional perspective, I tried for a little bit, but my stuff, I think there's not enough people there looking for the kind of thing that I talk about. So It hasn't been worth it for me from there. Though in past things, I used to have a cheerleading business, and Pinterest was like the number one thing that drove traffic. So I think there are pockets of it that if you're more like DIY, it's probably better for you, because that's what I go for.
Oh my gosh. Now I want to know about the cheerleading business, but we'll move on. The next one is LinkedIn.
Again, I have a profile. I don't use it. I'm not really looking for jobs and things. And so it's just sort of like, it's a little stuffy and a little spammy. Like I get sort of a lot of like messages just like randomly, and I don't know, it doesn't feel like a place where people are actually connecting in a meaningful way. And so it doesn't really feel like a place that, I don't know. And I certainly don't need it for whatever career aspirations I may or may have, which I don't even know what those are, but
that's fair.
I refresh it. Like if I was looking for a job, I refresh it so that there's a presence there and people can check me out, but I don't really use it. There's probably like a bajillion unread messages and notifications that I need to.
That is completely fair assessment of LinkedIn. TikTok.
I like TikTok from a consumer standpoint. People are really, really creative and funny and smart and about all sorts of different things. And so it's really fun. I did use it for a little while from a creator perspective. But again, I feel like the pockets of what I talk about are very extreme in their opinions. And because I talk about Christianity and discipleship, so we've sort of got like, so there were people who either loved what I was saying, and then people who just came and dunked on it constantly. And then it also had this weird thing where like people who aren't even in the community, so like atheists, were coming and like just insulting things. And so it just sort of like felt very weird from like the comments I was getting and stuff. So I was like, I don't know that there's a space of people, because my people are sort of in the middle. We're not really left. We're not really right. We're like in this weird middle. And there's more of those people on Instagram and Twitter than there seem to have been on TikTok. Or maybe I was just really bad at selecting the right hashtags. I don't know. Because I think there is a lot of people in that thing. I come across their videos, but they tend to be a little bit more extreme than I am. And so I think they're sort of, So it was very hit or miss for me. And so it was just like, once Instagram started doing reels, I was like, great, I don't have to learn a new platform. I'm just going to keep it over here and build in one place. But I do spend a good amount of time just scrolling. Like if my husband's cooking dinner and I can't start a TV show, I get on TikTok and I'll scroll for 30 minutes and just come across a lot of things. So it's fun, and it's people, always stunned by how creative people are on there.
Absolutely. And I agree with you in that, and from talking to other TikTok creators, that the comments can be wild. Yeah, because it's a different, I don't want to get into teaching, but it's a different platform. It is not algorithm based as the same type of thing that Facebook and Instagram are. Even the reels on Instagram are not the same algorithm as your feed post. It is very much hashtag driven, and it's very much more, they feed you what's popular in those things versus what you're following or what you've interacted with before.
Right.
So that being the case, you get a lot more randomness, and the people that come across your content are a lot more random, which makes sense and why you would get these very bizarre,
so it just sort of felt like I do not until I can figure out how to target this better or something. It just doesn't feel that was not worth my mental and emotional energy.
Right.
Because the other thing is, I also take responsibility as a person. Like, I want to have discussion. So if someone brings up something, I'll at least present the other side or present more details about what I'm saying. I'm not going to convince those people, but at least somebody else in the comments, if they see it, will see the other side. And, if it then devolves from there are instances where I mute and block and delete and things like that, which is a new thing for me. I try not to do that. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but there have been some instances where people have really stepped over what I feel like is a line. So, but on TikTok, they didn't seem interested in any of that at all, or it was just sort of like, it was all baiting in the way that they would comment versus just actually wanting to talk about stuff. And even on Instagram, I feel like people will semi talk about it. They'll at least go back and forth kind of nicely for a minute, and then it'll usually devolve after one or two interactions, at which point I try to just be like, agree to disagree, have a nice day, and stop it where it goes crazy. But I accidentally deleted a post on Instagram once, but it was probably for the best because it turned into a giant pile-on to me. And so it was just not worth. So when it comes to those types of things, those are things that I don't find worth my mental and emotional energy, especially when I don't have the knowledge to really speak to common objections. So if I do post something somewhat controversial, it's because I actually have the facts to back up what I'm saying. And I will happily share that with people.
There's that Enneagram 5 coming out.
There it is.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me that your focus or your goal, or even just what brings you joy on these platforms, are the conversations. You're there to discuss and to have, healthy debate in a good way, on these platforms. And that's not what happens on TikTok. TikTok is not a place for conversations. So I totally understand why that would not be your jam. That makes sense. I'm interested. Are you more interested in public commenting, debating, discussions versus DMs? Do you spend a lot of time in your DMs?
I do spend, I guess it depends. I don't know what a lot is because I only have my experience. I would say I spend a decent amount of time in DMs, and most of that is people saying thank you, or I relate to this, or do you have more resources about this thing or that thing? Because sometimes I'll say, if you want an article around this that I found or whatever, DM me and I'll send it to you. And I do that. And then we have some conversations around those things. So so that happens on Instagram. It happens a little bit on Twitter too. I've gotten this thing on Twitter now where people are asking me, questions that they're embarrassed to ask in public because of what I talk about when it comes to Christianity and evangelicalism and all these things. People are really wrestling with what it looks like to be faithful. And and if they can be and still believe this thing or whatever. And it can be hard when you're really embedded in these communities in your life and online to bring up some of those things. So in that way, I do spend a little bit of time in DMs, just like being like, no, it's okay. Or I'm so sorry that happened to you too. Or just little things like that. And it's funny, I don't go there for the debate. But I want people, I want people to see bigger picture. Like I want people to have this, like, to be captivated by the same vision that I'm captivated by, and to understand it and to start living through it instead of some of the smaller things that they make the big things. And so sometimes that means creating some debate, and sometimes that just means saying, I see you and I hear you and I understand because I've been there too, or I've seen this in a lot of people and we can do better. And so it's sort of like a both-sided. So I get sort of both of that. But in public, it's usually objection, and in DMs, it's usually me too, or I don't know who else I can ask about this.
I had a conversation with another Instagram creator who writes on things about body issues and can be very sensitive subjects. And she's like, what am I supposed to do with my engagement when people just DM me? Because they don't want to they don't want to reveal themselves or say very personal things in the comments, but they really want either your affirmation or, like you said, other resources, or to have this conversation about this in private. So that is an interesting, I don't want to say dilemma because it's not a dilemma, but an interesting quirk to that kind of platform. But I don't think it's in any way, shape, or form a negative thing, because this may sound crass, but sales happen in the DMs. Totally. I mean, that is where you are building the deepest relationship, and they are most likely and willing, and you can share an actual link that goes to an actual place to help them further in, like, well, here's this resource, here's this product I created, here's this thing I wrote, all of that. So it's a great thing that you have people showing up in your DMs. I think that's wonderful.
I think that's such an honor that people trust me with some of those things that they're going through or dealing with, or even just thinking and not sure what to think, And so I feel really honored that they feel like it's a safe space to show up. And that's something I hope for, because I know that in some of the environments in which we interact with the content that I talk about, it's not safe to have doubt or not safe to do those things. And so, yeah, that to me is the height of, if I just am able to talk to people that way. And in that way, I get to ask more questions and we can go deep and we can go back and forth. And it's a little bit easier if we're actually having a deep conversation. So in that way, on Instagram, I say that's probably a place that I really enjoy too.
That's great. Okay. So as we wrap up, if you were sitting in a marketing meeting for your favorite brand, and you're a marketer, so you've probably sat in marketing meetings before about like this, but advocating you're the representative for Enneagram Fives, what would you tell them to do to send all the Enneagram Fives to their accounts, for those fives to feel welcome, to want to interact with them?
I think so. One thing I don't love like those little silly surface level questions that other people love. And sometimes I do, but even that, like, it sounds silly, but like, who's your celebrity crush or whatever? Like, I have to keep a list on my phone because I know that's something people ask a lot, and I'm not going to have the answer when people ask. And so I have a list, or like your favorite movies, like things like that. It's really hard for me to narrow down or to think on the spot. And so stuff like that I don't think about all the time, feel like I'm going to skip over that because A, I know that someone's going to judge that very specifically, and B, it's going to take me 20 minutes to figure that out or even remember, unless I have a list on my phone of this random bit that I know people ask all the time. And so I don't love those, but I do like bigger questions. So when someone's asking like, what's the difference between this or this to you? Or how do you determine this? Or, what do you think about XYZ? If it's something that's within sort of that pocket of knowledge that they're supposed to be about, and I follow them, I've probably thought about it or been thinking about it. And so either or So either I can drop something that feels right, or I can, ask another question, that can have a conversation around that thing. And I think too, anything that will teach me, enlighten me, go deep into something instead of a lot of like surface level information. I would rather have a deep dive into one thing and get some actual like facts and stats or terms or whatever that looks like on whatever platform. I really like those like specific deep pockets of knowledge instead of, I like high level too, because I like seeing frameworks of things and how people fit things together and structure stuff. But if you want my attention on something, I'll probably be a niche fact deep dive of some kind.
Oh, that's so good. I love the little tidbit that you have lists on your phone of like,
I'm like, oh, it's like the worst, but I know that people are going to ask and I'm not going to have the answer if I need it. And so I have to keep the list so that I remember.
you're like the beauty pageant contestant who's practicing for, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? Is that on your phone? You should have that.
I should have that. Well, that's the thing, I don't love the icebreaker questions. You know what I mean? Like unless you give it to me like 3 days in advance so that I can think about it and have the exact right answer so that I don't regret what I say in the moment or feel like, oh no, now that everybody else has said theirs, now I know, and so I prefer to be able to think about it. So I'm not opposed to an icebreaker question. Just give me at least a day to think about what it is so I can show up prepared. So I would say, that sort of stuff, if it's within your lane and people sort of think about those things within what you're talking, the icebreaker question is fine. But it's just, those are hard for me because I know that, I don't know. I just don't, those are just not things that I interact with all the time. And, they're not always things that I want to tell people or whatever. There's a certain amount of like, this is sort of what I think about and what I do. And I don't know. I don't know what it says about me that my celebrity crush is so-and-so,
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you know about me now?
Oh.
I'd rather talk to you about what you believe about God. Let's talk about that, like let's go in.
Forget my favorite color. Yeah. Do you know Jesus? Oh, well, this has been just delightful, Kate. Thank you so much for having this conversation. Can you tell us where everybody who's heard about all the things that you talk about, where they can go to follow you, support you, to help you out?
Yeah, my website is sort of where everything collects. So that's kateboyd.co. And from there, you can find my podcast called Happy and Holy, my newsletter about rethinking church and discipleship. And I'm opening, weirdly, though I'm not on Facebook group, I'm opening a Facebook group soon about creating a discipleship community for yourself. So you can hop on over there to those, and they're all on my website. So you can, that's a nice hub, kateboyd.co. And then on Instagram at kateboyd.co and Twitter at @the_Kate_Boyd. If you want a little bit more unpolished randomness, then Instagram and Twitter's the place to be.
There you go. Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been so valuable. This helps. I know it helped me, and I hope it helps all the other marketers out there to welcome and make sure that Enneagram 5s feel comfortable on their social media. So thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.